house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Ian, back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. I'm really excited about today's episode. Today we are going to review The Last of the Mohicans. This movie. Woo! This movie. This is a good one. It was a favorite of mine back in the day, and it still is a favorite. And, you know, we're going to talk about really everything representation. But first, let's get some of the new stuff out of the way. This is episode number 6, and we've had a lot of activity on the Instagram page since we last talked. We have a new follower, and my household went berserk when this happened. Tantu Cardinal followed us on Instagram, and me and my wife went absolutely crazy. So, Tantu, if you're listening, huge fan. Really appreciate everything you've done for Indian country and to further the positive and accurate representation in film. You truly were and are a trailblazer. So I appreciate everything you've done. And that's if you're listening. If not, everyone else who heard that, look up who Tantu Cardinal is, and you will most surely agree with me. So next thing, let's talk about this film. Let's talk about The Last of the Mohicans, one of the strongest soundtracks I've ever heard in any movie. So this was directed by Michael Mann. If you don't know who Michael Mann is, he directed Ali, which is a Will Smith film, Public Enemies, Johnny Depp, Heat, which had De Niro, Pacino, Val Kilmer, and Wes Studi also. So after this one, they did that. He also directed Manhunter, which was a film based on Red Dragon, the Tom Harris book. Really a Hannibal Lecter story, if you're not familiar. And Collateral, with Jamie Foxx and Tom Cruise. So if you've seen any of those movies, you'll know that this guy is a visually, he focuses more on the visual, and he's a stickler for details. So that kind of carried over to The Last of the Mohicans. Not a lot of dialogue. This is a movie based on the book by James Fenimore Cooper, which was written in 1826. Jeez. This book is written in 1826. It's a 5-book saga, and there's a fascination from Hollywood with this film because this is the 9th time that it was made into a major motion picture. Previous attempts of this were pretty terrible, pretty bad. Pretty bad meaning it perpetuated a lot of stereotypes, and it depicted natives as like vanishing Indians for the most part. So there were a lot of lazy attempts before this, and Michael Mann really wanted to up his game and put this in, well, so it's supposed to be set in New York, but they filmed all of this in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. And he really wanted to make it as historically accurate as possible, not just on the native side, but also with the representation of the time. This takes place in the French and Indian War, the 3rd year of the French and Indian War in 1757. So he really, reached out to historians, people who worked at the Smithsonian for native reference, and also other native historians to try to get it as correct as possible. Now, I will say, I'm going to recognize intent and the attempt to do positive representation, but I will point out there was some stuff they just kind of got wrong. So let's start with the cast. As usual, I'll go with the cast, do the overview of the plot, and then I'll talk about a few things that I think should be touched on in terms of cons and pros of representation, and then some final thoughts. All right, let's start with the cast. I'll just focus on the heavy hitters. So Daniel Day-Lewis as Nathaniel Poe, a.k.a. Hawkeye, in this movie. So a fun fact about Hawkeye. Hawkeye, from the book, has influenced other characters in cinema. So if you've seen MASH, the old TV show MASH, the main character Hawkeye in that, his name in the fictional story of the Korean War, of that medical army surgical unit hospital, MASH, he said that his father based his name on the character Hawkeye in The Last of the Mohicans because he said that was his only book his father liked. And then Hawkeye from the Marvel universe as well, Jeremy Renner. Well, most famously played by Jeremy Renner. But in the comics, he was notorious for being a sharpshooter in the film. And in The Last of the Mohicans, he is notorious for being a sharpshooter. He's referenced as long rifle, and they kind of put that on display. But in the book, he's really he's really known for being a sharpshooter and a marksman. So, fun facts there. So that's Daniel Day. He plays a white person that was adopted into the Mohican kind of tribe or the Mohican people. So that goes to Russell Means, who is his adopted father, is Chingachgook. And then we have Eric Schwig as Uncas, a.k.a. the heartthrob of the movie. And Steve Waddington as Duncan Hayward. He is the British officer in the film. Madeline Stowe as Cora Monroe. Jodie May as Alice Monroe. And then the legendary Wes Studi as Magua, who should have gotten an Oscar nod for this film. And I really don't know why, but I'll talk about that at the end. So let's start with the plot. Set in 1757, during the third year of the French and Indian War, the French and British are battling for control in North America, essentially. And this is a precursor to the Revolutionary War. And the movie opens up with an epic score. And so let me just pull aside real quick. You know what score I'm talking about. It sounds like a Scottish kind of undertone score with drums in the back, and basically, if you're a runner, you've run to that, or you get fired up from that song. And I really appreciated that because this is a native film, essentially. I mean, it's supposed to be. It has a native characters. It has a native story. I'm so glad they didn't go stereotypical and just have a bunch of drums and chants. And so they went and took it in a different direction. I appreciate that. So the movie opens up with Hawkeye, Uncas, and Chingachgook. They're running through the forest, trying to find an elk. They eventually take the elk down, give thanks after the kill, and then they kind of demonstrate their a little bit of caring and thanks. I really like that part. That was pretty realistic to me. They call him brother. I'm not sure if I agree with that part, but I think they giving thanks to the elk. I really appreciated that part of it, that small piece of it. That was kind of accurate representation of what we would typically do. I think across most native cultures, they have that. When you take a kill, you take a life for the sake of sustenance. You always thank them for giving you sustenance, providing for your family. I think it was a great thing to see. After that, another great thing that I liked, they go to the Cameron household. So they are a homesteader, and they know this family, so they show up at night saying like, hey, we took down an elk earlier. What I really liked about this is previously in other movies, there's usually bad news when natives go and visit white people in the middle of the night. It's never positive, but this family and the trio, they know each other very well. It's not the first time they've seen natives. They're not scared by them at all. They even like start, picking on Uncas of like, hey, when are we going to find you a woman? When are we going to start having you to have babies? And they speak English casually. They're not doing sign language. They're not doing any of that. They're just freely communicating. And so through this conversation, you kind of learn that they're trappers, the trio, that they're going to be on the fur trade, and they're going to be trying to get by that way, basically. And then the next day, the British come through trying to find people to recruit. So they're wearing, so in this scene, everyone's kind of standing around listening to this British person saying like, hey, you need to take up in arms and defend your homes. And then, so they don't, at least the trio don't. The head of the household, of the Cameron household, decides he needs to do that, and he takes off. Then and then they go on to play like a game of lacrosse, which I appreciated because lacrosse is, founded from that area, or at least it's the creator's game. So it was nice that they peppered this in there. I will say, though, most of the people in there are wearing really, really small breechcloths, and that's something that Russell Means took offense to. But I'll talk about that toward the end. So then you flash to the first scene of the Monroe sisters. So they are in one location, and they get correspondence from their father, Colonel Monroe, who's saying, hey, daughters, come on over to the base. I need you back. I want you to come. And then through all this, Duncan, who is who's a general, wants to marry Cora, who becomes Nathaniel Hawkeye's love interest. But he proposes, and she's like, "I'll think about it." And then so it's like after that, General Monroe's letter comes in and says like, "Hey, I want my daughters to come to Fort William Henry," and they are told to be escorted by Duncan and Magua, who's going to lead them to Fort William Henry. He's going to be their guide. And at this point, Magua is pretending to be a Mohawk, and on their way, en route to Fort William Henry, Magua's basically plan gets found out. He has Huron warriors waiting in the forest. They ambush the little cavalry that's trying to escort the Monroe girls to Fort William Henry. And then nearby, the trio is just nearby. Uncas, Chingachgook, and Hawkeye. And they come upon them being attacked, and they come and help. They come and basically save the day. And everyone dies except for the Monroe girls, Duncan, and Magua gets away. And so after that, they're like, okay, well, we can take you to Fort William Henry, but first, we're going to have to go... I'm sorry. After the smoke clears, they're still being looked for by the Huron. So they end up camping out that night near a graveyard, and then so they know that that's like off limits for the Huron. And at that point, they're like, okay, we'll be safe here for the night. That's when we find out that Hawkeye is from really of white descent, and he is adopted into the Mohican family. So his stepbrothers Uncas and his stepfather, his adoptive father, I should say, is Chingachgook. And then we start to see the initial attraction between Hawkeye and Cora. So then they make it to Fort William Henry eventually, and this place is getting bombed. I mean, it is getting destroyed. And so they got to sneak in under the cover of night, basically, and they go and see their father. I personally would have turned back. I wouldn't have gone inside that thing. It was getting destroyed. And fun fact, that set cost $6 million, that whole thing. And not a whole lot of dialogue, just a lot of action in this scene. And it's at this point that Cora really eventually makes it around to say, like, Duncan, I'm not going to marry you, because we come later to find out she has feelings for Hawkeye. So Colonel Monroe is a jerk. You know, the dad. He's like, I didn't send for you guys. What the hell are you doing here? And then they eventually find out, like, hey, Magua kind of pulled the wool over their eyes, and I think fake correspondence was sent. And then so Colonel Monroe is like, he's like, okay, you guys are here, whatever. I'm concerned about trying to win this battle. I don't want to surrender to the French. And he basically makes a line, draws a line in the sand, and says that the militiamen who leave to protect their homesteads will be charged with sedition. Because some of those people are like, some of the men that are fighting are like, hey, our homes are getting bombed. Our homes are going to be... So Hawkeye's friends at the Cameron household, and those frontiersmen, the nice white people they were talking to earlier, they had gone through there on their way to Fort William Henry and saw that it had been destroyed, saw the whole place had been set on fire. So Hawkeye tells that to Colonel Monroe. Colonel Monroe's like, loses his mind. Some of the other men that did volunteer to take up arms are like, well, what about our homes? Our homes could be burned down too. So Colonel Monroe's like, if you leave, if you even think about leaving, I'll charge you with sedition. You're going to be hung. And so Hawkeye, he's the good guy he is. Some people, he's just like, I got to go. I got to see if my family's okay. So he helps him leave, helps him escape. And Colonel Monroe tells Hawkeye, finds out and says to Hawkeye, like, you're done. Like, we're gonna hang you. You're gonna be hung. So Hawkeye and Cora have their romantic moment behind bars. Actually, before he goes behind bars, and then they have another romantic moment. So ultimately, this is just the building of the romance. And then a few days pass, and Colonel Monroe is just like, damn, I sent for reinforcements, and they're not coming. So I'm gonna... Actually, he sends for reinforcements, hoping that nearby another British kind of cavalry will come and help them. British army will help them. And the French intercepted that message and was like, hey, all right, we intercepted the incoming message from the British nearby, and they're not coming. They're not going to send help. So at that point, Colonel Monroe has no choice. He's got to surrender. And so there's a little bit of an aside that happens during all this, because we learn from the French general who hired and who helped Magua. Basically, I'm not really certain who helped who, but Magua is working with the French. The Huron are siding with the French in this. And Magua had his family killed by the British by Colonel Monroe. Really, his whole village was burned down, including his children. So he is out to get rid of Colonel Monroe. And when the French general tells the British, like, hey, you guys can go free. We settled peace. We beat the crap out of you guys. So you guys are free to go as long as you lay down your arms. So then that happens. And then so at this point, Hawkeye is still prisoner. And Hawkeye is, everyone's kind of walking in a single file through these trees. And at that point, Magua's not having it. He's just like, I need blood. I need to make sure that Magua is satisfied. And he always speaks to himself in the third person. But so he ambushes them. It's a massive, massive fight. Huge battle ensues. And it's very clear who's going to win. I mean, the British are just overpowered. The Huron have the upper hand. And Wes Studi, Magua, is just taking names. But he's looking for numero uno. He's looking for General Monroe the whole time. So he finds General Monroe and cuts his heart out. And I was just like, where did that come from? But Magua, his lines were leading up to that. When the gray hair is dead, Magua will eat his heart before he dies. Magua will put his children under the knife so the gray hair will know his seed is wiped out forever. And so he says something to that effect when he's standing over General Monroe right before he cuts his heart out. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's not a good image of natives. Like cannibalism, I didn't do enough research to know, but not that book kind of perpetuates a savage trope. I'm sorry, the movie, because this wasn't in the book. This was added. This was like Hollywood version of what happened. And so I feel like this almost toppled a great character for me. Magua was such an almost flawless character to me. And this was like, it added an element of badass to it. But when you look at the history of like the stereotypes that are perpetuated in film, I'm not sure I like that. But anyway, we'll get back to it. So eventually, this massive battle is going on between the Huron and the British. And the trio, Chingachgook, Uncas, and Hawkeye, they're just running through everybody. Like, they're not killing anybody. They're just trying to save Cora and Alice, trying to save the Monroe sisters, just try to get away. And they do eventually. They find some nearby canoes in a lake. They paddle downstream, but they're getting tailed. And so they find some cover under a waterfall, and they just push the canoes over edge. Like, maybe they think we'll go over, that we have gone over the edge. So they hide under this waterfall, and they're like, okay, there's no way they're not going to find us. What we can do, though, is have Duncan, the Monroe girls, stay here. Uncas, Chingachgook, and Hawkeye. We're going to jump out of the waterfall. And we are going to go take cover, whatever we got to do, and then we'll catch up with you guys, because Huron are going to catch you. Magua's going to find you, and he's going to take you up to the Huron lands up north, and we're going to find you. So there's this the famous I will find you kind of monologue happens. And I'm just going to go ahead. You know what? I'm going to do it. Hopefully I'll find some nice waterfall sound effects. Let me pull this thing. Yeah. I'm just gonna do it. So Daniel Day kind of looks out at Cora and is like, "No, you will stay alive. If they don't kill you, they'll take you up north to the Huron lands. Submit. Do you hear? You're strong. You'll survive. You stay alive. No matter what occurs, I will find you. No matter how long it takes. No matter how far, I will find you." And the waterfalls continue to go, and then dramatically jumps through the waterfall, lands into the river, all three of them, and then they eventually get to safety. So the next scene, the Huron go to their village and their leader, and Magua, he basically wants to be granted permission to kill the Monroe girls, to wipe General Monroe's seed from the earth, which is what he wanted. And Hawkeye comes out of nowhere, and he's like, all right, I'm going to go in peace. We don't have a good plan, maybe I can just reason with him. So that's what he does. And this whole negotiation, you have Magua and his Huron, kind of party, his posse behind him. And then you have Duncan, the Monroe girls, and Hawkeye. And Hawkeye is trying to talk to the Huron leader through Duncan. And Duncan is speaking French. And Magua is speaking a version of French and Huron from what you can surmise. And this scene, I personally love this scene because it's the first time that a film made the attempt to do something like this for natives that I can remember, where, when I was a kid, being Navajo, they always told us, like, Chief Manuelito spoke 5, 6, 7 languages because he had to talk to the Hopi, to the Navajo. He had to speak Spanish. He had to speak English. He had to speak Apache. And I just thought it was so freaking cool. That was the first time I ever saw it on film, that a native actor was told to speak, 3, 4 different languages. And to me, Magua could probably speak 5 or 6. He speaks French. He speaks Huron. He speaks English. He probably speaks Mohawk too, at least in this universe. And so I thought that was so cool. He was empowered to be just something, to be equal, to be like a force, to be a negotiator, to be a diplomat. And I thought that was so cool, that they just didn't, what typically Hollywood will do is just dumb everything down to English and just make everybody speak English for convenience. So I just want to take a moment to appreciate that part. So eventually the negotiation continues through this channel of translation, and Hawkeye, his last ditched attempt, is like, okay, so what I want to do is, he's been wearing this wampum belt this whole entire time, which was awesome to see too. That was a cool, subtle thing to pepper in there. But he says this: I'm Nathaniel of the Yengeese, Hawkeye, adopted son of Chingachgook of the Mohican people. Let the children of the dead, Monroe and the Yengeese officer, go free. This belt, which is the record of my days of my father's people, speaks for my truth. And he tries to reason with them to allow basically Magua to be happy and, let the ladies go free. And Duncan kind of throws something else out there. He knows he's not going to end up with Cora Monroe. She's got her heart set on Hawkeye, and so he sacrifices himself as a British officer and says that you can burn me at the stake. Because initially the Huron leader says Magua will take Alice, the younger sister, so that way the Monroe seed will live on, and Cora, she'll burn at the stake. So that way, more Magua's heart can be fulfilled. He can have revenge. He can have his vengeance. And Duncan says, nah, son, that's not going to work. Hawkeye, he loves Cora. That's not going to happen. He's like, burn me at the stake. Take Alice. Let Cora go. And that's pretty much what happens. And it transpires that way. They let Alice go. Alice, the younger sister, who really has been the love interest of Uncas this entire time, and I haven't really talked about that, but Uncas was into Cora, into Alice. It was all nonverbal. They didn't really talk. You could just see once again, Michael Mann, very visual. You could see that tension. You could see that emotion building. And so Nathaniel, Hawkeye, he's just like, all right, well, we got to get the heck out of here. We got to try to find a way to get Alice. We got to get your sister. And so, they start setting Duncan on fire, the Huron. And Magua is just pissed. He's mad. He doesn't even want to stay around to see it. He just takes Alice and starts booking it. They start taking off. And on their way out, Nathaniel, he's puts Duncan out of his misery. He's referred to as a long rifle. At least one occasion in this entire movie. He must be 300-400 yards out. And he takes out Duncan, shoots him right in the head. And, to put him out of his misery while he's on fire. And then one of the best chase scenes in film history ensues. From this point on to the rest of the movie, there's no dialogue for the last 15 minutes. It's great. So essentially what happens is Uncas goes ahead because he's like, that's my girl, Alice. I need to go see her. I need to save her. And he goes ahead of Chingachgook and Hawkeye and tries to save her. but he's not successful. He does manage to kill about 5 or 6 Huron on his own, but then comes up against Magua, and Magua is just too great of a warrior, just takes him out, and right in front of Alice, gets killed right in front of Alice. It was a tragic death. Uncas, the heartthrob of the movie, he was great. Basically a nonverbal character, just a strong native character in the film, and he is of the two of the last remaining full-blooded Mohicans in the movie, so this was a big deal. And Alice sees that, and she's just like, my world's over. Because she doesn't know that Chingachgook and Hawkeye are coming. She's just like, well, that's it. I'd rather be dead than continue to follow Magua wherever he's going to take me. So she jumps off the cliff, commits suicide. And Chingachgook, Russell Means, sees his son get killed from a distance, and he goes berserk. He's just like yelling. He keeps running up the cliff. And this whole time, Hawkeye, that's where we finally see the legend of Hawkeye, the marksman that he is. He's just running along. So these are like flintlock, like muskets, basically. It's like one shot, and then you're going to be taking half a day to reload this thing. So he's like shooting people. As he's like downing these people that he's shooting, he's picking up their rifles, and he's just running. And there's just epic music playing in the background. And they're just running along. Nathaniel, Hawkeye's grabbing 2 muskets at once and just taking out 2 people, and eventually we get this battle. Like, he's just paving the way for Chingachgook to get up to the top to face Magua, and they get up there, and this thing is over quick. Chingachgook is clearly the superior warrior. He just takes out Magua so fast, and after that happens, really the movie's over. Like, they settle down to mourn the loss of Uncas. And the last lines of the movie, you have Chingachgook, Nathaniel, and Cora Monroe. They're kind of all on the line. And Chingachgook, his last lines are, "Great Spirit, maker of all life, a warrior goes to you swift and straight as an arrow shot into the sun. Welcome him and let him take his place at the council fire of my people. He is Uncas, my son. Tell him to be patient and ask death for speed, for they are all there but one. I, Chingachgook, last of the Mohicans." And it kind of pans off into the beautiful North Carolina Blue Ridge Mountains, and the movie ends. So that was kind of a quick, as quick as I could anyway, summary of the movie that I felt like encompasses everything. There's a lot of nonverbal in this movie. That's Michael Mann's thing. But if you've seen this movie, and I hope you have, I hope that wasn't your first time hearing the plot, because this movie it's just a standalone movie. It is jam-packed with action, and this romance kind of detracts from that, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but this movie is solid, in my opinion. It did win an Oscar for Best Sound. That was the only Oscar it won, but and I really think because of, I think previously the only role that Wes Studi was known for was in Dances with Wolves. Prior to this, he killed it in this. Magua is my favorite character of all time, I think. It's like Thomas and Smoke Signals and Magua. Like, they're neck and neck. I love Magua. And to me, when I was a kid, Magua's death was so sad, because I saw this like powerful person who was a villain in the movie. Like, don't get me wrong, he was a villain, but he wasn't just a villain to be evil. Like, he had good intent. Like, General Monroe, he killed his family, set his village on fire, killed his kids. This guy had legitimate motives to do everything that he was doing. He wasn't just an ignorant savage. He wasn't just a, drunken Indian. And in the book, in the Last of the Mohicans book, that's exactly what Magua is. He is a drunken Indian that abandoned his family. And in this one, it wasn't like that at all. Magua was a great warrior that just wanted revenge. He was revolutionary up to this time because he was capable, he was powerful, he was intelligent, he was cunning, he was able to pull the wool over people's eyes, he was multilingual, and he was just awesome. He was just badass. That's the best way I can say it. And okay, if you've seen Last of the Mohicans multiple times like me and you love this movie, Magua saying Yengi, Yengi, that just Yengi, like that, when he says that every time, that just gives me like goosebumps. And it's like Lion King when he says Mufasa, ooh, Mufasa, ooh. Like I get goosebumps like that. I just get a reaction, and I'm just like, God, man, Wes Studi is so freaking awesome. I love this. I love him in this. If you can't tell already, I really like that there was awareness with his character. He tries to explain to the Huron leader that, like, hey, we should just start doing what the white people are doing. You know, trade fur and gold and exploit the land, exploit everything that we have available to us, exploit the resources, basically. And he was a forward thinker. You know, say what you want about that approach. Like, he really was a capitalist in that sense, because he was thinking like the people that were taking over. He was very observant to what was happening around him with the French and the British. And he's like, hey, these are the changing times, Huron leader. Like, come on, help us out. This is the way we got to go. So, some more positives. I appreciate the use of using native languages instead of just dumbing everything down to English. You know, a la Pocahontas, where you can just magically explain, you know, it away with some leaves and pollen and, you know, colors of the wind. You just dumb everything down, you know, magic solves everything. There was none of that. There was a lot of work put into this. So another cool thing, over 900 natives were cast for this film. 900. It's mostly Cherokee, but it was pretty awesome to see. I will say some of the negatives. I don't really know if this is a negative, but when they passed off Mohican and Huron with two languages that the actors already spoke, Russell Means is Lakota, so he spoke Lakota in the film, and they passed it off as Mohican. And so I'm not sure what Daniel Day was saying, if it was Mohican or what, but I know for a fact that Russell Means, he's a native speaker of Lakota, so they just told him to speak that, and they were just like, close enough. And for Magua, for Wes Studi, he's fluent in Cherokee, so throughout the movie, he's speaking Cherokee. And I'm not sure what the Huron leader was speaking. He did speak French, of course, but I'm not entirely sure what language he was speaking. But still, I mean, it wasn't... I think their kind of excuse for that was there's no native languages. Like, there's no... At the time, this is, you know... I'm going with what I researched. That Huron and Mohican were not natively spoken by anyone, so they couldn't get it, so they just went with the closest thing, which was having your native actors that you do have speak their own native language and pass it off. Fooled me. 100% you fooled me. And I think it came across in Magua's role and Russell Means' role, because they are native speakers in that language, and so when they acted, it didn't feel forced. When they acted and spoke, like their emotion came across. You could tell they weren't rehearsing lines. Like, they were legitimately saying things with emotion and intent and purpose, and that fit the situation. So, especially Magua in the negotiation scene when he's like bouncing between French and Huron, like it was, and it were French and Cherokee in this case. So, you know, I guess I'll let you decide with that information. Some of the negatives. All right, let's go to the negatives. So, first and foremost, war cries. I'm not about it. In general, I don't know the history behind war cries. I think maybe at some point, some tribes, some native nations did do war cries, but just with the history of it in film, like, war cries are just peppered in. Anytime there's a battle with the Huron, like with Magua's crew, anytime Magua's crew is on camera, there's war cries. And I think why it's problematic to me is it's not consistent. You don't hear Daniel Day-Lewis, you don't hear Russell Means, you don't hear Eric Schwig, you don't hear Wes Studi doing war cries at any point in this film. But anytime there's battles, like the big ambush when the British were, after they surrendered and they were walking along and they got ambushed by the Huron are going nuts right before they come and ambush everybody. They're going nuts. I mean, it's a very intense scene, because it's like, oh gosh, like, these people are screwed. They're not getting out. And it's like the sound is booming through the speakers and you're terrified. But when you take a step back, you're like, you know, at no point does Wes Studi do that. You know, the native speakers that have lines in this movie, they're not giving out war cries. And I don't know enough about the native history behind the war cry and which tribes have it and have not. And if it's you know, but I just don't know how I feel about it. And that's just me personally. That's just Ian's opinion. So take that for what it's worth. The old book is pushing some old lines back into the film. They did do some things like change Magua's timeline, where Magua was kind of like the drunken Indian in the past. But the last of the Mohicans, that whole vanishing Indian, the notion that we're gone, the notion that we are doomed, that's still perpetuated in this movie. And there are still Mohicans today. You know, I mean, there's still Mohicans around. I think I looked it up. There's roughly about 3,000 enrolled members. So they're still around. I mean, granted, they're not in like massive numbers, but they're still around. And this movie made it seem like Russell Means Chingachgook was the last one. And in 1757, that was it. And they were just a blip on the radar. They were just something to be reviewed from afar. They were just a entity that was gone, something that should be documented in the history books. So, while I did love Magua, while Wes Studi's role killed it for me, I did have issues with one particular thing that he did. One particular thing. Why the hell did Magua need to rip out General Monroe's heart? Why? That made zero sense to me. I get it, vengeance, like revenge, you want to do that, but what does that do for native representation? He didn't need to do that. He says verbatim earlier that he wants to eat his heart. So you have to assume that he took his heart out when he's holding it above, right next to his head, showing it to the camera of like, look what I did. I conquered my goal. I conquered my enemy, and I'm holding his heart out. You can only assume that he took a bite out of it or he ate it right after, because that's what he tells the French general earlier in the movie that he's going to do. I'm going to cut it out and I'm going to eat his heart, and then I'm going to wipe his seed from the earth. And I'm going to tell him that. You know, I don't know of many native nations that had cannibalism in their culture, at least intentionally like this for the purposes of revenge. Maybe it was some kind of mourning. Maybe it was a part of a mourning ceremony. I don't know. But I feel like there was not enough explanation given to that. If there was cultural significance with this movie, or if there was cultural significance to the Huron with that, I feel like they should have explained that. If that is legitimately something that they practice, if that is legitimately something that is revered as like a good thing to do or something that's culturally relevant, they should explain that. They just shouldn't show Magua cutting someone's heart out, because that's so like video game. That's so, at this time, like Mortal Kombat was around and you had characters like Nightwolf that did that. You know, they did it in fatality finishes, and it's just like a cool thing to do, quote unquote. It's just like a gore thing to do, and I just didn't like that. It was peppered in there. But I did a little bit of research on cutting the heart out. So there's debate about cutting hearts out. Supposedly, in history, there have been instances where native people have been documented to cut the hearts out. It wasn't cut the heart out specifically. It was like cutting off limbs and eating them. And it was supposedly documented for revenge. But you know where these accounts came from? Jesuit journals. I don't know about you, but I'm not trusting a Jesuit journal to tell me about native history, especially when their MO was to frame us as savages and tell everyone that we are less than and that we need to be stripped of our culture. But that really seems to be the only documentation. And there are instances too where I could see it, like you're about to starve, you're in a place where you have no food. You resort to cannibalism, but that's like for survival, not for revenge. And that's like goes across anybody. Like anybody can get to that point where you eat somebody else that died. I mean, look at Alive, that film, the airplane movie where that rugby team crashed in the Alps. They had to resort to cannibalism because there was no food. But in this case, Magua just cut General Monroe's heart out, said he was going to eat it. And this is kind of another one. Why does Magua always have to refer to himself in the third person? Nobody else does that in the movie. Is that just to set him apart as a villain, to say like, hey, Magua's evil, so let's just refer to him as in the third person? I really don't know where that came from. Were they trying to like lower his IQ or made him seem less than? He's like, that was like an old, like, I really don't know what that was, why he had to refer to himself in the third person. He was a much smarter person than that. He would never do that, my opinion. And maybe they just tried to cast him as a pompous person in a way where it's like, Magua did this, Magua did that, Magua's so great. But I didn't like that, because nobody else did that in the movie. And this, okay, so this is Magua aside. This is probably my last, like, negative thing of just the plot itself, and then I'll go talk about the costumes, and I'll wrap it up with my final thoughts. Native women aren't presented or recognized in anywhere. Like, most of these, we're the Iroquois Confederacy is supposed to be like a matriarch or a matrilineal society. Anytime they talk about with Hawkeye, when he talks about where he's from, he talks about it through Chingachgook. And we wouldn't do that. Even if the mother is gone, and even though she's not coming back, and even though she's not, even though, like, she is dead and the last of the Mohicans are Chingachgook and Uncas, you would still identify who you are through your mother. That's like the first thing you do in a matriarch, in a matrilineal society. You'd say, this is my mother, and then this is my father. Instead, they're just like, hey, there's my dad. That's who I come from. And even when Nathaniel Hawkeye, he's trying to like negotiate with the Huron leader, he holds up his wampum belt and he's like, I of the Mohican descent, are adopted by Chingachgook. He's like, well, you had a mom too. Like, who is that mom and that matriarch? And even then, the Huron leader, he's a guy up front. At no point during the Magua Huron leader and Hawkeye negotiation was there ever a Native woman anywhere present. I get it. It's in the middle of war. These people were probably warriors, like in the middle of war, but all the more reason for there to be women at the helm, because they're probably running everything while the men are out fighting. Like, they're probably collecting food, tending to everything, and they're not just left as like stewards of the camp. They're like left in charge, most likely. And they probably are in charge already. I just didn't like that there was no Native women voice in this. All right, let's go to the costumes. So the costumes, Russell Means. I went and watched a making of. I try to do that with all these. If there's a making of or like an extra features thing, there's usually a lot that they talk about in this. And the breechcloths. Russell Means, he called out the film while this was going on. This was an interview with him. Actually, this is separate from the DVD extra features. This was like an interview, I think like a year afterwards, maybe after it was finished. But the assistant directors, like, actually Michael Mann, he squared it with Michael Mann on this. He's like, the breechcloths are too small. What's up with the breechcloths? He's like, I felt, his words, I felt like that was just eye candy for the ladies. It didn't accurately represent natives. And so Michael Mann was like, well, that's what I saw in the museum. That's what I saw in a museum. That's what I saw. That was, this is relevant. This is accurate because it was in a museum. And Russell Means is like, yeah, in a white museum. That's not right. It's not accurate. If you want to show us that way, you go right ahead, but call it out for what it is. It's wrong. It's stereotypical. It's not accurate. So what did they do? They pacified Russell Means and the main characters. And it's funny, I saw this observation. This isn't my observation, but I 100% agree with it. The more skin you show in this movie, the more evil you are. You look at all the villains, all the people, all the Huron, all the people that are trying to kill people for revenge. They're all pretty much like, wearing lesser. They have smaller breechcloths. They're not wearing shirts. They're not wearing anything to cover themselves. They're just out there. But then you look at, quote unquote, the good guys. You look at Daniel Day-Lewis, Russell Means, Eric Schwig. So Uncas, Chingachgook, and Hawkeye, they're fully clothed. Yeah, they have breechcloths on, but they have like leather pants, or at least like hide pants on, and they have shirts on, every one of them. There's a shot that I have, the final shot, when Chingachgook and Magua are standing in front of each other. It's right after Chingachgook basically already fatally harmed Magua, and Magua is just barely standing up under his own power, and then Chingachgook finally gives the final blow to his gut, and then that kills Magua. But right before that final blow, they stand face to face, probably about 6 feet apart, and the camera is on them, and you can see in that shot, Russell Means is completely covered, head to toe, even up to his wrist. He's got like a long sleeve shirt on. His legs are completely covered. And Magua, Wes Studi, he's pretty damn naked. He's got some like legging things on, but he's got a small breechcloth on and everything. So I thought that was interesting. Overall, though, the costumes, they look like real natives to, whatever that means. But you know what I mean. Like, nobody was playing redface in this film. They actually cast natives for this. They did research to find out what the tattoos were like. They would look at old paintings from this era, like old pastel paintings from the 1750s, from the 1700s, to see what the Huron looked like, to see the kind of... So that's really what they based a lot of these designs on, and a lot of their makeup designs and their hair designs. So... they had 900 natives individually. They gave them all like their own identity too. They didn't just say, all right, we're going to give you like 3 triangle looking things on your chest. Next, 3 triangle thing. They had stencils, but they gave everybody a different look to try to have everyone be different, which I really appreciated. And I thought that was good. And once again, got to recognize intent. They might have missed the mark, but they were trying. Like, they put a lot of work into this. So the final thoughts on this. While they put a lot of work into it, some of it didn't show on camera. When you watch the DVD extras, these people, they did a lot of work. They had native historians. They had people from the Smithsonian that were consulted on this film. They had Native American history historians. And then they had like native historians also. And so they really went the extra mile. Michael Mann knew a lot. He knew a lot. When you hear him talk, it's like, man, you didn't just like pull a few like significant things from Native history and say that, yeah, let's go with those. Like, I'm not surprised if like this took years to make, just because of all of the historical detail they had to farm and everything they had to put together for the film. But it's just, some of it didn't come out, and some of it was too detailed. Like, you maybe have to watch this 3 or 4 times and like know exactly what you're looking for to see it. But I will say, what I appreciate about this, natives weren't dumb in this. We weren't dumb Indians. We weren't stupid. We didn't need a white savior. Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis is white. He's an adopted white person, but he was raised by natives. Like, so you get it. I mean, his character, say what you want about that. Hawkeye being a marksman, being a savior, quote unquote. I can be swayed either way, but I don't think he's a white savior in this film. I think I'm bothered by the romance that he had to end up with a white lady, and him and the white lady made it while a lot of the other significant native characters died. I didn't particularly like that. But overall, natives weren't dumb. They were great warriors. They were better warriors than the French and the British. At no point did you think like, oh man, they're screwed. Like, they had the upper hand. They had the element of surprise. They knew the land better than the French and the British. They were just like more superior, and I thought that was awesome. Magua deserved an Oscar. I truly believe it. And in watching these, the making of, too, hearing the actors, he got snubbed. Like, everybody that interviewed him, they were like, I hope you're ready for the Oscar buzz, Wes. I hope you're ready. You're gonna be getting nominated. I'm positive. And he wasn't. And I think that's a huge shame. Another thing I really liked, not every native word spoken had subtitles. And I don't know if that was by intent or if that's just a Michael Mann thing. He doesn't use a lot of foreign language in his films. So there are just some phrases that Russell Means says, or Hawkeye says, or Unka says, or Magua, that it's just like, hey, let's go, or hey, do this, or let's get out of here. Like they don't put subtitles up. They're just like, hey, body language and action will translate what they just said. For some reason, I just appreciated that. That's a throwaway thing that shouldn't be significant, but to me that mattered, because in real life, like getting that, let's go. Like you don't, like in Navajo, like let's go. You don't have to explain yourself. Like, what does that mean? Because everyone's getting up, everyone's leaving. All right, go net. See you later. You're getting up, you're leaving the room. Like no one's gonna stop and say like, oh, excuse me, can you translate that to English, please? Or yeah, and you start shaking hands. Same thing. I think it's cool. I thought that was pretty cool. This movie, I think it's important. Why all of this is important for this particular movie is this documents the 3rd year of the French and Indian War, and this is shown everywhere. Me and my brothers, we're all 8 years apart, so I'm 32. And my youngest brother, so that makes him, make me do math on the spot, 24. All 3 of us were shown this movie in U.S. history. And I have a handful of friends that I asked in preparation for this, like, yeah, we saw that movie. We were shown that movie. So this is, I mean, one, it's entertaining because it gives the teachers a chance to like talk about the French and Indian War while showing a movie that is entertaining. But like this has reach. This will frame people's minds about what natives are. So the vanishing native, that's a problem. Even though you got a lot of stuff right. Magua eating the heart of somebody, of his enemy, that's a problem. The fact that Cherokee and Lakota were spoken instead of the actual native language, that's not really an issue, because that's kind of goes over their head, kind of goes over everyone's head, unless you speak Lakota or Cherokee or have an ear for those languages. That's really the only time you're going to be like, hey, that doesn't seem right. But these are I mean, this movie has reach. This movie has been seen by millions of people and will continue to be seen by millions of people because of how great of a movie it is as a standalone movie that documents a time in history. So, despite Daniel Day-Lewis not being native, he played a character who wasn't native, that was adopted. It was just the story. I can live with it, and let me be frank. It's Daniel Day-Lewis. He did 100% independent films up to this point. This was his first like major motion picture movie. He killed it. And it's Daniel Day-Lewis. He's a method actor. If you want anyone to play somebody, it's going to be Daniel Day-Lewis. He's going to destroy that role. He's going to kill it. So I had no issues with it. This movie was received positively, too, at the time. So it's hard for me to say what it was like in 1992 because I was a child then, but overall, this was a maturation point. This was when people compared this to Dances with Wolves, they would say Dances with Wolves in jest of like, this is a lot better than other movies like Dances with Wolves. They would say that about this movie. So clearly this was a step in the right direction. This was a maturation point of like, here's the bar for what a accurate representation looks like in 1992. Freaking Pocahontas came out 3 years later. So it just shows that while the bar was raised, the floor was still way the heck down there. Like it was not good. So I think this will be a thing for me. This will be how I review this, like the final send-off. Will I show this movie to my son? I said with Pocahontas, no. Last of the Mohicans, I'll show this to my son. I think there's a lot of positive things in this. There's a lot of good things in this. I'll watch this with my son. I hope he watches this with me. The last thing I'll say though is just Yingi, like legendary. I freaking love Magua. I freaking love Magua. This was a great movie. I love it. Well, that's the end of it, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed it. I love this movie. I was real excited when I put this on my list. Trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. I'm thinking Wind Talkers, maybe Thunderheart. I'm not really sure. Magnificent Seven, the 2016 version, that's on here. The 1960 version is also on my list, so I might just put out a poll on Instagram and see what people think. But I'm real excited. This podcast, I think, is getting much better. I hope you noticed the difference in the sound. I got a new rig, a new setup. If you're curious about what it is, hit me up. But no, I won't bore you with the details. All right, everyone. Talk to you later.